Welcome to this Talking Ideas debate, which is about decolonizing the Music Academy. We're joined today, and a warm welcome to Professor Arturo Farrell from UCLA, who's Associate Dean for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. Hello.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great. Allan Moore, Professor Emeritus at the University of Surrey.
Aye.
Dr. Mia Pistorius, Research Fellow at the University of Huddersfield.
Aye.
Dr. Natalie Hyacinth, Senior Research Associate at the University of Bristol. And Dr. William Fourie, Associate Research Fellow at Stellenbosch University's Africa Open Institute for Music, Research and Innovation. And
Hi.
Hi. And I just thought we could start with a quick stock take of where we feel we are now in terms of decolonizing and inclusion in academic music. I mean, my impression is that 20 years ago, I felt quite optimistic. I felt that there was more, certainly in terms of ethnomusicology, more ethnomusicology happening, more sort of non-Western art music, you know, jazz, popular music being studied. This seemed to be happening and progressing. But I felt more recently that things have kind of stalled, certainly until earlier this year, when after the death of George Floyd and the sort of resurgence of Black Lives Matter movement has made people question things again. But maybe we could start with Arturo. What's your impression of where we are, I suppose, particularly in the States?
Well, I didn't realize it was a discussion, even in academia, 10, 20 years ago. When I was an undergraduate, I certainly felt I felt great umbrage at the idea that one very Eurocentric and colonial view of theory and musicianship was being presented, coming from an Afro-Cuban, Afro-Latin jazz background. And then over the years, I've seen little discussion, quite frankly, until this year. And this year it became a hot topic. This year it became a serious, serious point of debate, to the point where we've gathered all of UCLA's musicianship and theory and performance faculty into a dialogue about how we really change the curriculum at UCLA. We're actively pursuing a change with an anti-racist committee composed of students, staff and faculty we've decided that we need this year, if not sooner, to change our curricular approach to teaching theory. And of course, I'll be honest with you, we're meeting with some resistance, but for the most part, our faculty are ready to understand that we are equipping our students to be less than global and competent musicians, musicologists, and scholars if we don't give a more accurate assessment of music than just a very, very tiny sliver of it.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, thank you. Allan, do you want to come in and give your view?
Yeah, I mean, I was struck by what Arturo said there, because I don't think, I mean, I spent 30 years in British universities, and I don't think that I was ever involved in training potential musicians and musicologists, because the number of people who do a music degree and then actually go on to make music, any sort of career, is minimal. Most people do music as a way to do something else as a career. So my emphasis was always on making sense, on listening, rather than on theory per se or on performance. I think what I've noticed is, I mean, it's different in the UK to in the States. It's different from the UK to the rest of Europe, for instance. I mean, popular music has become part of the academy and also the university in the UK to quite a high degree, I would say now. I mean, the number of people who can do popular music performance degrees is almost limitless. The number of small institutions who offer these things. Now, that's something that grew from almost nothing 20, 25 years ago. But in parts of Europe, I mean, France, particularly Italy, is very behind the times, if you like, in that sense. Germany is not so bad, but they are decades behind what's happened in the UK. So I don't think we're talking about a single issue. I think we have to be careful where we're locating things. The ethno side of things, I suppose that's how I first started to become interested in stuff outside the Western tradition. But I'm not so clear on where that is going, or maybe things are going backwards. I mean, there are departments where that has taken over, with a certain amount of problems. I mean, that in itself is very problematic, but I think that's the situation.
But it's problematic that it's problematic.
Well, I think partly the problem lies in the emphasis being on performance. What we're teaching people is to perform their own music, which I have problems with. The theory, if you like, the theory component and the sort of contextualization of popular music within degrees, I think is still way behind the times.
Yeah. Okay, Natalie, do you want to come in here?
Yeah, thanks. I really have many ideas from Allan's and Arturo's talk, particularly Allan, because my experience has been in the UK and the UK Academy. And I can sort of say that I feel that things have changed, and I can't really say whether they've been for the better or not, but I can definitely say that when I was doing my MA at Goldsmiths, about 7 or 8 years ago now, I was on the cultural studies degree, and I wanted to do my dissertation on dub music, because that's part of my research, particularly dub music in London and the kind of connections with the diaspora that we have in the UK with Jamaica. And I kind of got quite a lot of not pushback, but at the time, the idea of doing a dissertation on this music called dub was like, well, what's that? Whereas since then, what's happened is actually there's a lot more networks springing up around dub and reggae. And what I've personally found is, as Allan said, there was an explosion of popular music courses, right? And every music school had a sort of popular music person that, talked a little bit about pop and hip hop and that kind of stuff. But what I found is that the kind of popular music that was covered was almost the same ground. So, they would talk about hip hop in quite a stereotypical way. I mean, stereotypical in the sense that we know that hip hop relates to space and place and these kind of things. But there was a kind of a feeling that things weren't really moving forward. And in terms of popular music, some of the lesser known genres of music, particularly lesser known genres of Black electronic music, were not being covered at all. So genres like dub, techno, house, these are all the things that I wanted to bring into the academy, because these are the sounds of our city. And I think that a lot of people, when they think about ethnomusicology, obviously they do have these kind of very old school ideas of you having to go to a distant island to study that music. But I've always said that we can do ethnomusicology in our cities. There's amazing music in London, in New York, in LA. And I feel that a lot of popular music courses, although there was an explosion of them, as Allan said and I'm saying, in the last 10 or 20 years, they didn't really tap into this. They didn't tap into this amazing creative potential that we have in our own cities. And that's something that I would like to bring into the academy personally. And I think that would be one way of decolonizing the music academy. So actually looking at our own environments and saying, this music that is being made here in our urban areas of our cities is valuable. And of course, that all sort of pairs with, you know, Black lives. It's also saying, you know, black music, Black urban, modern city music is valuable, and Black lives are valuable. So that's why I think this is so important, valuing Black urban music. That's my one of my passions that I want to bring to the Academy.
Right, thank you very much. Mia, you actually work in an art music, Western art music genre, opera. So you're going to have a different perspective, but you've also taken a view of, you know, looking at decolonizing and so on. So what's your take?
Well, so I am South African, but I did my postgrad studies in the UK. So I guess I bring active. And I think that maybe something to think about right from the start is what do we actually mean by decolonizing? Because it sounds to me that what we are discussing right now is basically increasing the diversity of our tertiary educational offering. But, you know, as an opera scholar who works on opera in South Africa, something that often comes up is, which conferences do I present at? Do I present at the Society for Ethnomusicology, or do I present at the American Musicological Society? Because there's this kind of distinction that persists between art music as a kind of disciplinary category and ethnic music as a disciplinary category. So for some reason, if you are Black and you're an opera singer, you must fall in the ethnomusicology category. You know, so I think we need to think very hard about disciplinary distinctions, and something that comes into that then is also, how do we think about this thing that we call expertise? Because technically, when we think of a university as a place where expertise is nurtured and also valued and celebrated, and something that we see, I think there's a lot of that in South Africa, but also here in the UK, and especially among minority communities, is that we have an idea of expertise that has to be recognized by a certain type of degree, or a certain level of research output, or a certain type of performance output. But there's an enormous amount of knowledge that does not get recognized by university structures. That's actually incredibly valuable, that comes through generations, through lives spent developing a certain type of skill or a certain type of prowess, and also a certain type of insight into how music fits into everyday practices, or into communities, or into practices of spirituality. So I think as long as we have a kind of fact-based bias to the study of music, we're going to keep excluding these types of knowledge systems. And in the end, you know, if we want to decolonize, we want to increase or expand what we view as valid knowledge, as recognizable knowledge. And, you know, that might include music and ghosts, or music and memory, or music and spirits. Recently, we had the first master's dissertation in South Africa that considered seriously how this musician interacts with the ancestral spirits, and that is part of a certain type of knowledge that is recognized within the academy. So I think that if we're going to talk about diversifying the curricular offering, then maybe we've made progress. But as long as we hold on to a very specific idea of what constitutes knowledge, we are not going to manage to decolonize the academy.
I think that's quite a revolutionary idea, because I think the sticking point is often about, you know, being articulating knowledge. It's clearly, if you've been you know, brought up or worked in a particular tradition for decades, and you're a master of that tradition, you know, you have that knowledge, but you know, maybe you haven't written any research papers about it. So, you know, it's how exactly how that knowledge is validated, isn't it? Yes. Okay, William.
Hi. Yeah, also just thinking about sort of taking stock of sort of when did the decolonial wave really start? And I think in its current manifestation, I would definitely look at it, at least for myself, in 2015 with the Rhodes Must Fall movement that started in Cape Town and then found its way to the UK, to Oxford University, amongst others, and really sort of started gaining international traction around there. And I just want to emphasize that's in its current kind of manifestation, because of course the decolonial discourse has been going on for 50 years, more or less. And I think at times we suffer from a little bit of sort of societal global history amnesia, in the sense that we sort of think that decolonization is something that is always kind of emergent, that it always reproduces itself in the kind of current moment. And to a certain degree it does, because we're really faced with the kind of nuts and bolts and practical problems of decolonizing curricula in the UK at the moment. But that's not to say that that discussion hasn't been happening for a very long time. And I think where I'm kind of coming from is trying to think of the ways in which the sort of earlier decolonial theorists could be harnessed in the current context. And I think there's still a lot to be said about, you know, even Fanon in the context of the UK. And can we have an undergraduate degree that starts with its first class and the first reading that you do come from Wretched of the Earth? I mean, that would be fairly revolutionary in the UK as far as I know curricula here. But in the context of South Africa, that wouldn't necessarily be very revolutionary, because those things are already happening. And there are incredible programs at universities in South Africa where these discussions they're part of everyday life. They inform curricula. Curricula have changed. You know, as Mia was saying, there's a far greater acceptance at this stage of Indigenous knowledge systems within universities, and looking at those. Of course, the project isn't finished by any sort of measure, but it certainly is far more accepted and striven for, I think, at a very practical level in South Africa. Whenever you're developing new curricula, whenever you're thinking about the type of postgraduate cohorts that you're trying to attract, whenever you're thinking about funding applications, the decolonial question is front and center. At least it has been for the last 4 years. So I think that's sort of also to give a different take on the discussion around decolonization.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. I'd like to maybe go into a more open kind of format with this, because if we go around everybody for every question, we're going to be run out of time very quickly. So, so my next sort of point is really a question about, you know, who does a music degree at university, because it all starts with that, because obviously the people that, you know, take a music degree end up being researchers and teachers, and, you know, their preferences are you know, then sort of extrapolated on and on. So if you just want to put your hand up, and, you know, and I'll call out your name. Okay, so Arturo, who goes and does music at university at the moment? Mike, please.
I wanted to address a couple of things that actually were really interesting that came up. Allan said something about
okay.
I think there's a lot of subtle differences between what I think is higher education and music in the UK and what is in. I didn't mean to insinuate that all we did was teach performance. We actually do have a great deal of ethnomusicology, but there's a couple things I just want to say. The first thing is that Mia said something that I think is really amazing, which is that how do we define knowledge? How do we define the story? Who tells the story and whose story is told? These are the kinds of issues that I'm dealing with. For instance, we talk a lot about ethnomusicologists telling the story of the music of Black people, and by far the majority of these ethnomusicologists are white. And so it's not a racial issue so much as it's a perspective issue, because of all the works that are written that are ethnomusicological are written by white male scholars. So here we have a kind of a very serious issue, because our students, and this goes directly into your question, when I look out across my classes, I see an incredibly diverse bunch of people, not just because there's Black and white young people, but there's a lot of Hispanics. There's a lot of Asian Pacific Islanders. There's a lot of people from all over the world. And so we're teaching them really something that comes from a series of tomes that we've all learned from, that have been passed down, whether you're studying ethnomusicology or not. And the course offerings in most of the places that I've seen have everything from pop music to Pink Floyd to specificities in ska. I mean, they're all over the map. The other thing that I wanted to say about who is coming to our institutions to learn, it's definitely not just performers. It's a wide swath of people. Decolonization is the de-emphasizing of a country that establishes a colony, and I'm not sure does that exist as a concept in the United States, which is a huge colony of sorts. I mean, it's kind of it's a very different place, and I don't know that we're beginning to be colonizers. We're beginning to really be quite drastic in our efforts to make everyone think like us. But I think the kids that come to us know better than that, and they're looking for answers as to why we teach the way we do and what constitutes knowledge and what constitutes elitism, because those are the constructs that shape everything.
Mm-hmm. I mean, clearly, decolonizing stands for different histories and different issues in different countries. I think in the States, obviously, the history of slavery looms large, and the continuing problems of African American communities. In the UK, it's always difficult to get away from class in the UK. I think the questions of class are always overlaid with questions of race, and of course we have different communities as well. As a large Indian subcontinent community in the UK, which again, certainly my impression would be that they're hugely underrepresented in music academies. And in South Africa is another thing again. Does anybody else want to speak to this question? Yes, Mia.
So I think just briefly, what you just said about the differences in the histories that we're dealing with when we speak about decolonization, raises the very obvious point that, of course, decolonization or decolonizing the academy is going to look different in different places. So we must be careful not to try to apply a one-size-fits-all model. And I think the other thing, and that relates to your question of who comes to university, we must ask ourselves also very seriously, what is the university for? And that is, again, going to be dependent on where we are. And that ties in with very large issues such as class. In a country where the majority of the population lives on or below the breadline, a university degree is probably going to have to do something different, or is going to be expected to do something different to a community where there is a very robust social care system, or a society in which the class barrier seems a little bit higher. So I think that asking who comes to university is a good starting point, but also we have to ask why.
Sure. I mean, we can take this, forward into, who is not coming to university to do music, who's underrepresented. So, yeah, Natalie, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I really echo what everyone has said earlier, that decolonization is about what constitutes knowledge, very much so. And I think this is particularly interesting in the field of music because, I can sort of speak from my sort of UK, London perspective. But when I was growing up, I never thought that music was something that I could ever pursue. And it's only because I just had such a passion and interest in music that I went on to study it for my master's and from then my PhD. But so when I was growing up in the UK, in London, pursuing music was something that we thought white middle class people did. And it's also a class thing as well, because in terms of your question about who does a music degree, if you are coming from an economically oppressed community, if you even get to uni, and I just about got to uni myself, you are not going to be thinking about doing a music degree. You're going to be thinking about doing something that you believe leads you straight to a job. And that is why we don't have people from, say, working class backgrounds feeding into music degrees, because that's seen as a kind of a hobby. You know, it's something that you do on the side. It's beats that you make at night. It's not necessarily something that you would study, or you might study it in a management type sense, so music industry management or something like that. So I think we've also got to think about the socioeconomic dynamics involved in studying music, also mixed in with the politics of knowledge. So, you know, a lot of young kids, in a sense, are doing music degrees. They are, right now in our various cities, they are creating new beats, creating new genres. They are manipulating music software to make cool new music. And that's something that you can't actually teach in a classroom. And so there's a lot of knowledge being produced in other ways that the academy often doesn't recognize, but that is recognized in the cities, in communities. And they create these amazing music communities, these genres that then get bigger and bigger and go out into the world. And then it's probably a genre that a popular music course might actually study one day. So it's kind of a very weird synergy between kind of not really, you know, almost ignoring these music communities that are kind of bubbling up under the surface, and then finally studying them when they sort of become well known. And I just think that we should kind of value and appreciate them at all times.
Yeah, yeah. I did a quick sort of look around some of the big music departments in the UK before this, and my general impression was, and despite the fact what people are saying, okay, that there are some places where there's a lot of ethnomusicology happening, and you know, Arturo's classes are very diverse, but you know, just looking at the staff lists, you know, generally no black people, no brown people on the staff, and maybe a quarter of the staff concerned with ethno or popular music type things. So, and that's certainly, you know, the impression that I've had, you know, in my work as well, that these things are regarded as kind of minority interests, they're kind of marginal. And I think when you compare that to the massive kind of influence and creativity of African Americans and African traditions from Cuba, from Brazil, from Jamaica, and how you know, how influential and you know, exciting they've been over the last 100 years. It's, you know, it's a complete disconnect there, isn't it, Arturo?
Yeah, no, you dovetail beautifully into something that I've noticed. I do a lot of work with Cuba and Venezuela and Latin America, and a lot of the training institutions there do not deal with popular music.
No.
They, in fact, in ESA, in the Escuela Superior de las Artes in Cuba, they don't teach Cuban music or jazz or any kind of popular music. And yet every single, and there's a couple of things I wanted to say, and yet it's music I think that is happening in Cuba, because it's created industry by kids with computers and with drums, and no absolutely, and some of those kids are extremely well trained classical pianists as well. So I don't even know if I'm making a statement so much as raising a question. But I think the other thing that's worthy of note is that in a place like Cuba, in a place like Venezuela, which is also, by the way, incredibly racially integrated, mixed up, and you don't know when you're looking at somebody quite what their background is. Um, the vocation of music, the job, musicians are looked upon with great respect and admiration and supported by the traditional village setting or by the people in your neighborhood. Whereas that is not the case in the United States. In the United States, when somebody says, my kid wants to be a musician, please help me out. Please talk them out of it. I'm like, and I think it's really interesting to note this dichotomy, this disregard of popular music, the unbelievable embrace of popular music by people who are very well trained in the Eurocentric colonized sense.
Yeah.
And what is the correlation between that and the arts and music and culture as a very high bar through which every human being must pass.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I mean, Venezuela, of course, also has this El Sistema idea where you get disadvantaged kids and you give them classical Western classical music, and somehow they're lifted up through that. I mean, that's another. We're talking about. And I suppose I'm naturally going to the idea of diversifying the curriculum and embracing things that have been underrepresented hitherto. But of course, many sort of a Western art music musician would say, well, we just need to bring more people into orchestras and get them to do Schenkerian analysis, which is another perspective. Yeah, William.
Yeah, I think on that point. Something that Natalie said earlier about the politics of knowledge can be kind of expanded a little bit to the geopolitics of knowledge, and really but even to the geopolitics of practice, I guess, out of this discussion as well, how we perceive certain forms of training or certain forms of music making as attached to a certain place. So a classically trained pianist as somehow representative of a Eurocentric kind of worldview, which is not necessarily the case always. I'm thinking about forms of music like Amakwaya in South Africa, which is choral singing, and it's done in 4 parts usually, or 3 parts, and it's it works basically on the type of functional harmony that you'd study in any kind of run-of-the-mill undergraduate music degree, Western art music degree. But at the same time, it's a form of popular music, right? It's the most widely practiced form of music in South Africa, and it is absolutely grounded in the local vernacular, and it is absolutely grounded in a local history. But that's not to say that there's an easy distinction between how does this constitute something that can be learned at a conservatoire-style Western institution, and how might it be thought of as a local vernacular kind of style of music making. And I think a lot of my research tries to think about how do we upset or sort of challenge these geopolitics of performance. Just because something came from somewhere, does it actually mean that it holds that same significance in the place where it's found root? And I work on modernist music, and I can tell you a lot of the modernist music that I look at rejects a Western-centric or Eurocentric worldview. And a lot of the composers that I speak to on a sort of regular basis also reject that mode of thinking, even though they're writing in serialist idioms or spectralist idioms and stuff like that. So I just want to upset that boundary a little bit.
But doesn't actually a hierarchy then appear there where Western art music claims for itself a universality, which is partly true, I suppose, the same way that, well, not in a different way that Western popular music has a universality, but that can be for everybody, and it applies to everybody because it's supposedly ethnically unmarked, whereas other musics are then related to African Americans or Cubans, or and they are then sort of ghettoized in a way into ethnomusicology. I think Mia, did you write the Dust Bowl of ethnomusicology? That it can be a bit of a ghetto, can't it? And those things can be sort of nicely squared away, whereas this great Western tradition is universal.
Sorry, if I could quickly respond to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the idea that I'm trying to put forward is exactly that it's not universal.
Right.
it gets made and remade in different guises, and the very act of claiming it as universal is a colonial move.
Exactly. Yes.
That's where the problem comes in.
Yeah.
To think of something like a classically trained pianist playing Bach even as unequivocally related to Europe or Eurocentricity is in itself a colonial mindset. When a classically trained pianist plays Bach in the middle of Swaziland or Eswatini or somewhere like that, it's no longer as easy as just saying, well, this is just a vision of Europe in this kind of contested environment. That's not to say that I think, you know, we're going to solve the world's problem by training everybody to play Bach on the piano at all. I'm just saying that I think when we think about something like Western art music, it's very tenuous to think of it as still marked by some kind of universality, or that it's for anyone or anything like that. It's about the ways that these things get appropriated and remade and indigenized in the process. And then it's no longer Western art music.
Right, right. That'd be interesting. I mean, I've worked with Brazilian diasporic music where, you know, similar questions come up, you know, to what extent the meanings that music has, you know, where it comes from, you know, still persist where, you know, it's been adopted in another context. Does anybody else want to come in? Yes, Natalie.
Hey, yeah, thanks. I just wanted to respond to William's comment, which I really enjoyed. And I was just going to say that I think that when we're talking about decolonisation of ethnomusicology, we have to obviously situate it into the broader debates, as William was alluding to. And, you know, the fact of the matter is that we still live in a racial hierarchy, which pertains to this universalism that we've been talking about. So Western art music still has this universality element to it, component to it, because we're still living in a world which pits different so-called races from top to bottom. And that is the real issue here. That hasn't been solved. So we're still dealing with issues of racism and discrimination and prejudice. And obviously, this year, a lot of these questions have come to light with the murder of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter. But I think we as a world are just still grappling with the ashes of colonialism and the racial hierarchy that was put in place. You know, I still feel it. Even in London, you can still feel that there's this hierarchy there, and that translates into music. So if people implicitly and explicitly value Black lives and Black minds and Black bodies, not just Black but brown as well, and LGBTQ, trans, all of these other kind of minority identities, if they are valued less than a white body or white male, then we're always going to get these issues in ethnomusicology and music studies. So it's about situating it, as William said, within broader geopolitical debates. And personally, I think that true decolonisation, when we really get to a kind of raceless world, I know that sounds a bit utopian, but when I feel that people just see me as a human and don't have all of these ideas about me before they even hear me speak or meet me, until we get to that point, then this is going to be an ongoing debate in the academy. And I think we are still very far away from getting to a kind of, you know, colour-blind world, so to speak.
Arturo.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things that came to mind. One of the big debates, in fact, there was an article about it several weeks ago in the New York Times, is about the way we teach jazz, which is sometimes referred to as America's classical music or African American classical music. But there's a lot of debate because most of the students that are in jazz conservatories and programs are white and male, and so a lot of the professors are as well. So the debate about what is race-based and what is, I think all those things can be kind of brought down to what is elitism and how does academia play into elitism? Because in a way, when the jazz world was when Ken Burns and Wynton Marsalis elevated jazz into the sacred halls of institutional life, I think a lot of damage was done because jazz was always music of the highest spiritual and intellectual and artistic level possible. But I think when we ratify things by saying they're academically approved, by teaching them in institutions, by giving them a high, we kind of squeeze the life out of them. I'm just going to speak kind of plainly because this has been my experience, is that art is an equalizer. Art is not about elitism. In fact, elitism is anathema to life. Elitism is anathema to art. Elitism is anathema to jazz. And so I think some of the things we talk about, yes, they're racial, yes, they're socioeconomic, but the thing that's really interesting to me is how elitism is a cultural construct that supports socioeconomic terrorism. And I hope you heard that carefully, because I think, I will say, I can't speak for the UK, but I will say that one of the things that American academia is going to have to deal with is the fact that we tacitly approved racist institutionalized practice for decades and decades and decades and decades and decades. The truth of the matter is the people that go out and become politicians and go out and become business leaders are part of the machinery of academia. We turn them out. And somehow along the way, for decades and decades and decades, we didn't teach them that elitism isn't a conduit for socioeconomic oppression. And so I'm watching the beloved art form that I participate in, the thing that I live for every day of my life, which is to create this music that is diasporic. I watch the life of it being literally squeezed out by the academization or institutionalization of it. And so I think that there's a lot of debate here that is about colonization, and a lot of it that is about socioeconomic manipulation.
Allan, we haven't heard from you for a while. Would you like to come in here?
Well, I've been trying to work out where I place myself against, or in relation to what a lot of people are saying. I think what we haven't addressed, and which to me is extremely important, is the issue of genre. We talk as if the purpose of a music degree is to teach genres, is to teach histories, is to teach overviews, is to teach perspectives, which I've always found problematic, and I've always tried to avoid, because it seems to me that we all construct our own histories necessarily, and I have no authority really to say that the history that I construct is better than one that my student constructs. Yes, I may know more, I may know more links, but basically it is based in my own experience, and all our histories are based in our own experience. But what I can do is to suggest ways of approaching. So rather than teaching a fact or teaching a body of music, if you're teaching an approach to that body of music, then you're doing something which is, in effect, the music itself is irrelevant. And I think that's where I've always tried to get to. The music we're actually working on doesn't matter at all. What matters is how you are placing yourself in relation to that music.
But don't different kinds of music require different approaches?
Yes, but you've got to learn that from your own experience of them. There's no point in being told that. I mean, because different people have different experience. We were talking about Bach earlier. Different people experience Bach in different ways. Now, there is a canonical way of understanding Bach, and there are various other ways of understanding Bach. Now, if I am upholding my position within academia, I will say, well, this is the right way to approach Bach.
Yeah.
you know, and the other ways are somehow lesser. Now, I challenge that. I don't think that that is actually true. I don't think that is any longer sustainable. The problem is, the reason we've got to that point is because everything that we deliver has to be measured, whether it's teaching, whether it's research, it has to be measured. And the notion of measuring it is foreign to artistic practice. It's something that we brought in from the hard sciences, where it's relevant, it's necessary. But for us, it's actually the problem. Sorry, that's wildly off on one.
That's really interesting. I think there are lots of fantastic, fantastically challenging ideas. I think Natalie's, pointing out, the burgeoning creativity that's happening right in front of us, and that we need to engage with it. And if we're not engaging with it, we're missing out hugely. Absolutely, that appeals very much to me. But also, Arturo's point that, when you academicize something, you can kind of freeze it. You can become fossilized very quickly. And I've heard, jazz musicians complain about that. That once you start to sort of codify what's going on, it's no longer free, and that essential. I mean, the improvisation is something we haven't really talked about. The valuing of notation as opposed to other ways of coming to music and creating music. And once you have this set of rules in place, then it becomes less free and less interesting, and bloodless in a way. So yeah, these are all, yes, Mia.
Just to pick up on the notation issue, but also on, again, how we think about what actually constitutes valid knowledge. And that goes to, the problem of having to measure things. And that goes to the problem of ossifying things once they do enter the academy. Again, we have to think very carefully about what the relationship is between the university and the communities in which it is embedded. If we think of the university as a kind of isolated structure where knowledge is produced and contained and it kind of sits on its own, then of course things are going to ossify, but then also we're going to be reproducing a very specific type of knowledge over and over and over again. Whereas if we get universities that become more embedded in communities and in actual living practices, like the ones that Natalie was speaking about, then we end up with a university that is both dynamic, but also with a type of knowledge that doesn't force a kind of calcification of practice. And I think something to think about there, so two things that are very important for me are, firstly, we must do away with this requirement that people must be able to read music if they want to do a music degree. Because how many musicians do we know who can't necessarily read a score, but are consummate thinkers about music, or people who can articulate in a very sophisticated way about music cultures. And the other thing is that we must also diversify our university offering in terms of the languages that we can speak. We can't keep teaching music to people who are going to university and learning in their third or fourth or fifth language, which is often the case in South Africa, where we have 11 official languages. So, and of course that becomes really difficult, because how do you create a knowledge culture in language that has been consistently and systematically disinvested right from the very start? But we need to start to think of ways to do that.
Okay, our hour is coming to an end. I just want to say thank you very much to everybody for a fantastic discussion. It's really nice to meet those of you who I hadn't met before, and I hope to see you again.
And thank you for putting this together. It's been great. You guys are all amazing. It's been great.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Jochen.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Great to meet you.
Bye.